Najlepša hvala spoštovanemu predsedniku uprave in članu uprave SDH. Zdaj pa prehajamo na temo letošnje letne konference in sicer upravljanje korporativne kulture in znotraj tega grajenje uspešnega nadzornega sveta in uprave. Izjemno smo počaščeni, da se je vabilu odzval eden bolj prepoznavnih profesorjev in izkušenih strokovnjakov z področja korporativnega upravljanja in upravljanja človeških virov ter organizacijske kulture, profesor Philipa Stilesa. Prihaja z priznane poslovne šole Judge Business School Univerze v Cambridgeu, je pa med drugim tudi gostujoči profesor IEDC poslovne šole Bled. Odlikujejo ga bogate izkušnje tako na področju upravljanja s človeškimi viri, organizacijske kulture, upravljanja sprememb, korporativnega upravljanja, dinamike nadzornega sveta ter nasledstva. Vključen je v številne raziskovalne skupine na teh področjih, ki vključujejo velike svetovne multinacionalke. Njegov izjemen življenjepis smo vam predstavili tudi v vabilu na letno konferenco. Gospod profesor, veseli smo, da ste z nami in da nam boste predstavili načine, kako naj s tem strateško pomembnim področjem upravljajo najbolj odgovorni v podjetjih. Professor Stilesa, we are honored to host you. Please welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Dobar dan. It's very good to be here. Thank you for the introduction, and it was very interesting to hear the talks early this morning. Maybe I'll just say a few words about me, and then we'll get started with the presentation. So my name is Philip. I work at the University of Cambridge in the UK. I've been at Cambridge for about 12, 13 years, and my role is to do primarily about research, and second to teach, and third to advise. And I guess over the last 10 years or so, we've been looking at a number of organizations in the government and in commercial organizations and not-for-profits and all over. And I guess what we've seen along those organizations in terms of effectiveness and performance and governance is a kind of bell curve. So at one end, we have a group of organizations which are really, really good, some of the best in the world, in fact. And in the middle, there is a group of organizations which they're fine, they're okay. Not fantastic, not terrible, but they're okay. At this end, there's a group of organizations where there are big problems. And I'll discuss one of those organizations a little bit later. And when you get at this end, where people are demotivated, the culture is bad, the leadership is not great, there's a big job to be done in terms of restructuring and turning culture around. And our job, I think, at Cambridge and elsewhere is to see if we can't just move organizations a little bit up this curve, just to try and move organizations along this curve. And what I want to do in this presentation is just maybe to describe some of the research here that maybe that might help us think about this. I suppose there are 2 points to the presentation. One is about culture, and the second is about governance. And both are very, very clearly linked. So I'll just discuss some of the research. I'd be very interested in your opinion about the research, what you think of it. Maybe before I just start, I'd just like to say I've been kind of coming to Slovenia for several years, primarily to go to the IEDC with Danica Perg here. And we've had a long relationship together, and it's been a fantastically fruitful relationship. And I always think of Slovenia with great affection and great passion. And I'm sorry that I come from England and I can't speak Slovenian, and also that I bring the English weather with me. So I apologize for that. But hopefully this presentation might help you think more kindly of England. And also, it's nice to be away from Brexit for one day. That's really nice, right? So don't say Brexit at all today if you can. That would be lovely. So, all right. So we're just going to try and say a few things. And maybe after the coffee, we'll have some questions and so on. 2 things, really. When we think about governance and culture, we tend to think about 2 basic areas. One is director quality. So how good are our directors? And secondly, what is the culture of the board? So those two things. Second point, I guess, is that many directors are hampered by the board and they're not able to deliver the effective performance. So you have the talent in place and people are very, very motivated to do it, but there's something in the culture which just stops you from doing it, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And third point, I guess, is that culture comes from the top and what we call the tone from the top. And if we can get that right, then pretty much everything else will follow, okay? The problem we see a lot in organizations is that the tone from the top is not quite right, okay? And what we'll try and do, again, a few examples and a few thoughts about just how we might fix that, okay? So that's what we'll try and do in this session, and try and get at these kind of big, difficult areas and see what you think about them. Before I begin, I know some of you, because some of you I know attended IEDC, and it's great to see some of you here, but I'm guessing many of you don't know each other, I'm guessing. So just for a quick 30 seconds, I'd just like you to turn to your next door neighbor and just tell them one thing about your organization that makes your organization special, okay? So just turn to your next door neighbor, tell them one thing that makes your organization special, okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Only for a few seconds. I know you could go on for hours, right? But just for a few seconds. Okay, how was that? Was that easy or difficult? I'm hoping that was easy. Okay, so what kind of things would come out of that discussion? I guess, how distinctive you are, and maybe what kind of culture you have, maybe a little bit about the values you have, the purpose you have, yes? These kinds of things. Sometimes it's quite difficult to talk in a very easy, quick way about how good our organization is. Sometimes it's good to remind ourselves how good our organization is, particularly for people below your level. So sometimes these exercises can be beneficial. I'm going to ask you a slightly more difficult question in a minute, okay? But just, there's a recent study done at Harvard, and they took a big sample of organizations across the world with big numbers. We're talking probably about 3,000, 4,000 organizations. And they asked the question, what really matters in corporate governance? And this was the result, okay? So number one issue, according to the research here, is board quality and composition. Board quality and composition, okay? I don't think that's a big surprise, okay? I think we probably all know that, okay? So the rhetorical question for us is, are we happy with the quality of our board? Okay, rhetorical question, okay? Okay, question number one. Secondly, the composition. Is the composition as we would want it? Okay, could that be a little bit better? One way to think about a board, of course, is as a team. Do we have the right people on the team? Okay, so, in your opinion, who is the best team in the world? Just shout. Who's the best team in the world? Who do you think? It all depends, right? It all depends, right? Which is not very helpful, right? Not very helpful. Except for one thing. One thing determines performance in teams across every team, and that is the concept of psychological safety. Psychological safety. In other words, people feel they can speak up without any fear, and the meeting is not dominated by one person. Okay? So, psychological safety has two elements. Element number one, everyone speaks at roughly the same amount of time. Okay? Everyone speaks at roughly the same amount of time. In other words, there's not one person dominating. Everyone speaks at roughly the same amount of time. Okay? That research was supported by MIT also. Okay? Big piece of research, same conclusion. Second, in addition to everyone speaking, the second point is everyone must listen attentively without interruption. If you have those two elements in your board will work very, 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 very well. And the question is, how many boards have psychological safety? And the answer is, not many, right? Not many. Because one person dominates, two people dominates, and the rest, not much. We do work at headhunting firms. And in the headhunting firms, we had one person speak to us from a very large firm in London. And he said, in some boards, there are people who will never speak, ever. And second, in most boards, there is a distinct lack of chair abilities. Okay? In other words, within a board, what you really, really need is a very, very strong chairperson who can make sure that everyone speaks. Right? This is how we try and get to this board issue here. Okay? So if we can establish that culture within the board, we'll be doing very well. Okay? But just to give you a little bit more research, this is from PwC this year. Almost half the directors of the survey said at least one fellow board member should go. Right? That's quite a dramatic finding. Right? Question for you, which of your board members... No, don't answer that question. No. But that's a dramatic finding. Okay? Same survey. 43% of that survey. Remember, PwC in the survey, these organizations are big, successful organizations. Right? These are not the corner shop. Right? These are big, successful organizations. 43% say it's difficult to voice a dissenting view. That is a very, very dramatic finding. Right? It's not a very unusual finding. I mean, I'm sure you know that's not news to you, but when you see it from the research, that is a very dramatic finding. So what good is the board doing? Yes. What is the board for? If not to hear dissenting voices? Right? Or are we just a nice country club organization? I'm sure you wrestle with this. We wrestle with this. Every organization in the world wrestles with this. Right? So, this is a kind of universal problem. There are lots of reasons for it. Just to give you again a little bit of research from Harvard. So, strong culture, you can see the difference. Strong culture meaning psychological safety, clear in all the roles, good chair skills. I won't go through it all, but just to show you, on the left-hand side, broadly engaged in all aspects of board responsibilities. Okay. So the weak culture board is like half that. Half that. And again, if you look at the bell curve here, strong culture is like 5% of the organizations in the survey. Third one along, discuss corporate culture at more than 50% of the board meetings. So how much are we playing on corporate culture? Yes. again, you don't see it discussed very much. We take it for granted. We think it's okay. There was a nice study done also by Deloitte about digital transformation. And the survey asked leaders, what do you think of digital transformation in your organization? And they asked the leaders and they asked the employees, what do you think? And when they asked the leaders, what do you think of digital transformation? The leaders said, everything is fantastic. We're going very, very fast. It's all really good. And we've got the best technology and the best people on it. When they asked the employees, how do you think digital transformation is going in your organization? It's very slow. The leaders don't understand it. You know, we're way behind. We should be a lot further ahead. Right? Just this disconnect is huge. When you see sovereign wealth funds, so what it says, the governing body should have the necessary authority and competency and act in the best interest of the fund, okay, obviously. Second point is interesting. It should be structured in such a way that it can independently and objectively achieve its objectives. And the question for every organization is our board structured well enough so that we can objectively achieve our objectives? Right? What should we do? Is that a sign for me to go? That's probably a sign for me to go. We'll go and give that guy a cup of tea in a minute. He'll stop. All right, so look, what do we mean by culture? What do we mean by culture? Here's the model, okay, just so we can all align our thoughts together on culture. This is the basic model of culture. Okay, many of you have probably seen this model, but just in case, just 10 seconds on this. When we think about culture, we think about three things. Number one, the artifacts or the symbols of the organization. What do the artifacts suggest about us? Okay, one of the artifacts of the organization is the leadership team. That is a big artifact. Okay, that is very visible. Okay, also where you work, the buildings, the dress code, the layout, all those things are artifacts. Okay. Second thing, the values. What do we say about ourselves? That we are well governed, that we are progressive, that we are, a good employer, etc. All those kinds of things. The third thing is what we call the underlying assumptions. And what that means is, what do people really believe about this organization? Forget what's said and forget the artifacts. What do people really believe about this organization? Do the people really believe what is being said in their name about this organization? Or like the board of directors. The board of directors is there and we say we want to do strategy, we're accountable, and we want to choose people well. What do people really believe about that? Yes. For this model to work, for any model to work, there has to be alignment. In other words, the artifacts, the espoused values, and the underlying assumptions all have to align. Okay? They all have to align. If there's not alignment, in other words, if there's a gap between any of these levels, you will get some kind of cynicism. Yes. I'll give you an example in a minute, but you might get some cynicism. So let me give you a quick example from where I work. So we have we do a lot of research with organizations. One of the organizations we do research with is a company just between us, a company called Marks and Spencer. Are you familiar with Marks and Spencer? Yeah, okay. It's not here anymore though, is it? I don't think so. No, but you still buy all your suits and your shirts from Marks and Spencer, just like everyone in England buys their suits and shirts from Marks and Spencer. Right? Once upon a time, Marks and Spencer was going through a recession, just like every other organization in the UK, and a piece of the chief executive wanted to cut costs. And so he got a consulting firm to try and see where they could cut costs in the organization. And the consulting firm came back, and they said to Marks and Spencer, to the chief exec, you have 3 offerings in your clothing range, okay? You have men's clothing, you have women's clothing, and you have children's clothing, okay? In our research, the consulting firm's research, they found that children's clothing earns less revenue per square meter than men's clothing and women's clothing. Okay? So children's clothing doesn't earn as much as men's clothing and women's clothing. Okay? So the chief executive sees this, and he thinks, okay, what I should do then is I should take children's clothing out of the stores and replace with more men's and more women's clothing. Okay? So imagine I'm the chief executive and you are my board. Okay? I'm saying to you, I want to take children's clothing out of the stores and replace with more men's and more women's clothing. Okay? Do you agree with me or do you disagree with me? You're going to disagree? Why would you disagree? Just raise your hands. Who's a parent in this? Everyone, I guess. Pretty much a lot of people, right? I suppose a lot of things that when you do as a parent, if you buy clothes for your children, probably you're going to buy clothes for yourself as well, I guess, right? So if there are no children's clothing in the stores, probably you won't go there either. Therefore, it's a false economy, and therefore the strategy is flawed. That would seem to be a kind of obvious point. So obvious, in fact, we don't need to have any new data to check that out. We just know that's a bad idea. Or let me put it another way. When also at the same time, Marks and Spencer said, because of the recession, we don't want to give any money to credit card companies. So we want to just have in the store Marks and Spencer's own credit card and cash. Good idea or bad idea? So, on that board of directors at Marks and Spencer, 17 members of the board, okay, minimum salary, £1.3 million, okay, average length of tenure within Marks and Spencer, 8 years, retail experience, 12 years, etc. Not one person spoke up against that, okay, not one. Not one person said we should not take children's clothing out of the stores. Okay? That's quite a surprise, right? Because it's a stupid decision. They're not stupid people, right? In fact, quite the opposite. These are brilliant people. And they know that they shouldn't take children's clothing out of the stores, but they're not going to tell the chief executive that. Because they're afraid of the chief executive. Okay? The chief executive was 16 years old when he left school. He didn't go to university. He went straight to the trainee scheme. Went on the trainee scheme, ran a store, ran an area, ran a region, got to the board. First non-family member of the board. Under his command, £1 billion profits, 8 years in a row. European Retailer of the Year, 9 years in a row. This was his first mistake. His first mistake. And nobody said a word, right? Marks and Spencer is still one of the great organizations of the world. Even they have problems with this. The artifact was the chief exec. Big figure. Espoused values. We have psychological safety. We listen to everyone. Everyone is equal. Underlying assumptions, never question the chief executive, right? That's the underlying assumption, right? And that beats everything. So question for all of us in this room, and for me too, where I work, is what are our underlying assumptions? In other words, what do people really believe in your organization? How do you know, right? Particularly from where you are, because you're here and everyone else is here, and it's very difficult to know how to do that. So the underlying assumptions are kind of crucial, really crucial. Okay. So just to be brief, so culture is kind of the way we do things around here. It's a system of shared meaning. I'll give you an example in a minute. System of shared meaning. Okay, that's good and bad, double-edged. Sometimes if the culture is bad, like at Marks and Spencer at that time, people will not join and they will not stay. So it's very difficult for them. It was very difficult for them. The only way they could change that culture was to fire the chief executive. Artifact change, right? Change the artifacts, okay? But if you fire the chief executive, that's catastrophic. I mean, nobody wants to do that. But that's what they had to do. So when we think about culture and change and accountability, it's tricky, really tricky. So, famous piece from the Financial Stability Board. The tone from the top, in other words, what you can achieve. Tone from the top. What are the core values of your organization? Yes. What are the core values of your organization? For example, have you got the core values of your organization tattooed on your body? If you haven't, I think there's a tattoo parlor in Ljubljana. You should go, you should put it somewhere. You should, there is an index of companies where people have the most tattooed on their body because they love the company, they love the organization so much. Yes. Number 1, Harley Davidson. Number 2, Nike. 3, Coca-Cola. 4, Adidas, and so on, right? I'm only joking about the tattoo. You don't have to have the tattoo. But how do people feel about the organization? Yes. How do you feel about the organization? Second, accountability. Who's held accountable? If you look at the high-performance teams research, there are a lot of teams which are really, really good. The difference between a really good team and a really high-performance team is accountability. We all hold each other mutually accountable. That's the difference between a good team and a brilliant team. That little difference. Okay? That difference. Yeah, accountability. That's very difficult to achieve. Very difficult to achieve. Third thing, communication. How open are we? How open are we? Yes? So McKinsey say the 3 big words of corporate governance: communication, communication, communication. Right? Easy, easy. Also, McKinsey, once upon a time, they asked, big question, why do people join organizations? Number 1 answer, values and culture. Values and culture. McKinsey also asked the question, why do people leave organizations? Number 1 answer, what do you think? Number 1 reason why people leave organizations is the leaders. Absolutely, absolutely. By a long way. Huh? That's number 1, that's number 2 answer, right? What is number 2 answer? Have a guess. Number 2 reason why people leave firms. Have a guess. It's a hard one, actually. You kind of think it's money or challenge or responsibility or something of this stuff, but it's not that, although they're important. Number 2 reason why people leave organizations is the toleration, I don't know if this makes sense, the toleration of underperformance. The toleration of underperformance. In other words, some people in the board or in the organization are performing at an excellent level, and there are some people in the organization who are not performing at an excellent level. Okay. And the issue is, what are we doing about this group? Right? It does not mean you should fire them. It does not mean you should fire them. It means you should do something about them, okay? Train them or develop them or something like this. Right? Fourth thing, incentives. Incentives. In a big way, not just pay, but in a broad way. What are the incentives? Why should anyone do anything differently? Culture is about behavior. Culture is about behavior. How do you change behavior? Incentives. Well, you want to do two things. Sorry, just quickly. It's like I say to my, at Cambridge I teach on a degree called the MBA, the Master of Business Administration. There's a great MBA also in IEDC, same thing. When you teach on the MBA, the people in the MBA, they want to be changed in some way. And so one question you can ask is, or you could say to them is, we could change your behavior in 10 seconds. Okay. And they say, well, that's, we have maybe 70 people in the room, and you say, I could change your behavior in 10 seconds, and they say, no, you can't, and you say, well, it's very easy, because all I have to do is say, instead of now your assessment being, or your assignments being judged on an essay, from now on, your assessment will be judged on how many times you raise your hand. That's now your new criterion of success. How many times you contribute in the class. That's your new success. That will change behavior. However, you can do that, but it wouldn't be very successful because they would behave in the right way, according to me, but it would be ridiculous for them to do that because many people do not learn by speaking. Many people learn by absorbing. So you'd be punishing the people who learn in a different way. However, they'd have to do it. So I could change their behavior, but their attitude would be very bad, right? So when we think about culture, we try and change behavior, but we also have to change attitude. How can we do that? Right? Answer, your behavior, your role model behavior. That's how we change it, right? That's how we change it. It's a bit like diversity. We want diversity. Everyone wants diversity. We'll come to diversity in 1 second. Everyone wants diversity. So one way to get diversity is to hire for diversity and also to train people to be more diverse in their thinking. And there was a piece of research done came out last week from INSEAD, which said if you have a lot of ways companies try and do this is through implicit bias training. So we try and get at the implicit bias that prevents people from really fulfilling their potential in an organization because people are implicitly biased against them. And the training will be a good thing. And actually the training actually doesn't look like a good thing. In fact, it seems to go the other way. If you have implicit bias training, it makes things worse. Okay? And the reason it makes things worse is because you're not addressing the underlying structural issues of the organization. Okay? You're making people feel better that they've had a bit of training about it, but the deep-lying attitudes remain. Okay? So we need to get behavior and attitude together. Okay? So when we think about culture and governance and so on, it's also about risk, of course. We've talked about risk. Again, this is from McKinsey from this year. I won't go around all of that, but just on this point number 4. Point number 4. How good are we at assessing the risk in our organization? How good are we at communicating the risk in the organization? If things go wrong, are we open about it? Is there transparency, etc.? Maybe that's for our conversation after coffee. Again, I won't go through all this, but this is just a little example, and you can have all this presentation, of course. These are just examples of risk appetite statements made by boards in large organizations around the world. And I'm sure you have all this. But these are just very nice, succinct ways to put it. This is what we're responsible for. Okay? Transparency, transparency, transparency. Again from McKinsey, transparency. All right, last thing. I just wanted to give you a little case. You know, I come from a business school, we have to give you a case. Right? So the case is from a very large and successful organization called Barclays. Many of you, of course, know Barclays, I'm sure. So, Barclays has been on a very difficult journey. And we were kind of working with them to try and think about this journey. This man is a man called Anthony Jenkins. He was a former chief executive. In England, well, actually worldwide, there are a number of scandals in banking. One was called LIBOR. One was called PPI, which is insurance selling, which was missold. There was foreign exchange dealing scandals. There were gold standard scandals. There are a lot of scandals. Many of them involving Barclays. Many of them involving many of the banks in the UK, not just Barclays, okay? This guy, Anthony Jenkins, was hired to fix the culture. First thing he did, Barclays, by the way, has two major divisions, investment banking and retail banking. Investment banking was very risky for them. Lots of the scandals came from the investment bank side. Jenkins was a retail banker. He was hired to fix the bank. Remember our artifacts, okay? He's a big artifact because he comes from the retail side. There's a big signal how this bank is going to go. Here's his espoused value. My message to those people, in other words, the people who are not playing fairly, is simple. Barclays is not the place for you. The rules have changed. You will not feel comfortable at Barclays. And to be frank, we won't feel comfortable with you. Okay, there's a big statement. Okay. That's a very bold statement. First thing the staff did, they gave him a nickname. Do you know what I mean, nickname? His nickname was Saint Anthony. Right? Saint Anthony. That wasn't meant in a positive way. Right? That was not meant in a positive way. Okay? So already the culture is acting against him, right? Is acting against him. Okay. He introduces lots of things. Balanced scorecard. I'm sure many of you have balanced scorecards. To try and get away from the financial-only emphasis of the bank. Okay. Secondly, the 5 C's, the metrics. You can have all this if it helps. Okay. Customer and client, colleague, citizenship, conduct, company. Okay. Plus the measures. How far have they achieved it, and so on. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. In the headquarters in Canary Wharf, they have the big, I think I have it here. Do I? No. The 5 values, they're called RISES: respect, integrity, sincerity, something, I can't remember. Nobody in Barclays can remember either, by the way. There are 5 big values. And they're put in the big atrium of Canary Wharf, huge. They're as big, see this balcony? From the floor to the balcony, that's how big the letters are. RISES. Okay. In perspex. Except, now the emphasis is on the retail side, Barclays is no longer a very exciting place to be. And so a lot of people within the bank, particularly on the investment side, start to get a little bit annoyed about things. And they start to agitate, and success does not come. And people are upset because at the first set of figures for Anthony Jenkins' new reign, the figures are down. And so what they do is they fire him. Right? They fire him. No redemption, no second chance. The figures are down, he goes. Back to the investment side. Right? This is all like within 2-3 years. They hire this guy, Jez Staley. from a big American bank, JP Morgan, very successful, investment banker, big signal. One of the first things he does, takes down the big letters in the Canary Wharf. Right? He says they're still there, but they don't have to be in our face quite so much. Right? This symbolism is very, very important. So he joins, successful. Just want to give you the little case. The first thing he does, because of all the scandals, there's still a lot of scandals, not just Barclays, but elsewhere. First thing he does, he said, we should have a whistleblower policy. We should have a whistleblower policy, okay? Which is a good thing. So they introduce a whistleblowing policy. The first person to blow the whistle blows the whistle on a colleague of the chief executive. And says the colleague of the chief executive has done something bad, and the whistleblower wants to bring attention to this. So what does the chief executive do? Okay. First thing the chief executive does is says to his board, I want to find out who blew the whistle. Okay. Okay. Just to go back to this for a second. So, artifact, new chief executive, espouse value, whistleblowing policy. The board said you should not find out who blew the whistle. That would be unethical. He said, fine. Went away, hired a team of private investigators to find out for him. This is all public knowledge, right? This is all public knowledge. You just Google this and, it's just there. Okay? The board finds out about this, that he's hired a team of private investigators to deliberately undermine the whistleblowing policy. Okay. Question then is, if you're the board, what are you going to do about it? Let me ask you the question. If you're the board, you find out your chief executive has undermined the whistleblowing policy to try and protect one of his friends, would you keep him or would you fire him? Okay? Just raise your hands. I know I'm only giving you 10 seconds to think about it. Just raise your hands. Who would keep him? Who would keep him? It's hard to see through the lights. I'm not allowed to come here because otherwise there's all feedback. Otherwise, I'm not deliberately standing back here, I promise. Who would keep him? Who would keep him? No one. Okay, just for the sake of completeness, who would fire him? Just raise your hands. Most people, everyone. Okay. Even though he's very successful. Even though he's earning lots of money for the bank. Even though it would take maybe another year to find a new chief executive. Any change of your mind? What did Barclays do? You know? Kept him. Kept him. They kept him for all the reasons I just gave you. For the talent reason. He's too good. He's too brilliant. Makes too much money for the bank. He's hard to replace. It's going to take a year and a half to replace him. It's going to cost big money to let him go. It's going to cost big money to hire someone new. So let's just keep him. Right? I'm not making a case either way. I mean, what Barclays want to do is up to them. I don't know the details, but I know no one knows the details, but on the face of it, that's their call, right? They've got to make a call one way or the other. By the way, the Financial Conduct Authority fined the chief exec personally £650,000. Right? But they said he did not break the highest level of integrity. Whatever that is. I don't know what that is, but he didn't break that. So he stays. Okay. And all I just want to use that example for is just to say, in your organizations. None of this stuff is easy. You're going to have to make judgment calls all the time, yes? Small stuff, big stuff. You know, what kind of organization do you want? How transparent do you want to be? What message will these things send to the employees? And just between us, we do a lot of work with Barclays. When we meet their staff, I would say, roughly, just between us, I would say probably it's 70-30 split. 70% I would imagine think he should have gone inside the firm. So you can imagine what that plays like in the firm. So last thing, and then you must have a cup of coffee. Where are we? Let me. So, what should we do? What should we do? Just some general thoughts. Number one, the agenda, the board agenda. Old saying, 20% backward looking, 80% forward looking. Yes, let's do that. Everything is about, you know, your value to the firm is not picking over the accounts too much. Your value to the firm is innovation and growth and ideas and insight. That's the value for the firm. That's the value of the board. Secondly, board leadership matters. How good is the debate in the board? So, for example, do you look forward to board meetings? Rhetorical question. Do you look forward to them? Are they too long, too short? Too many people speak, not enough people speak? Are they ceremonial? Are they really real? Third thing, feedback. I think in Slovenia, the feedback culture is very good, I think. And I think in a lot of your organizations, you have evaluations for the board. I know that. So all that's great. Just keep doing that. And if you don't do it, do it. It's not easy, not hard to do. Last point. Boards are created, the best boards are created when every director is fully present and ready to speak up. I think this issue of psychological safety is super important. So what we always say is, if you're the person who speaks the most, maybe next board meeting, don't do that. Right? Try something else. Okay? Don't be quiet, but maybe you can rotate the chair role just for some meetings, or maybe you can assign people to give presentations and so on. But make sure that kind of works. There's good dialogue with that, okay? And that's the difference often between a good board and an outstanding board, is just the psychological safety. Yeah, psychological safety. So, in a nutshell, that's where the research is. I know we have coffee now. So, and I think we have questions for afterwards. But if there's anything burning on your mind right now, anything that you passionately want to ask right now, anything you need to ask right now because you're so full of anger or full of passion, is there anything like this on your mind? Are you all okay? Are you sure? Are you sure? All right, good. In that case, let's stop. We'll reconvene after coffee. And any questions, just let me know. Okay, just let me know. All right. Until then, thank you very much for all your patience and your attention. And we look forward to seeing you after the coffee. Thanks so much. Thank you.